Death on the 40th floor. The high-stakes sabotage of a billionaire CEO. At 6:47 a.m., a janitor on the 40th floor of a Chicago skyscraper found a shattered pane of glass and an empty office chair, still spinning. By the time the sun was fully up, the man who owned that office, and the company inside it, was dead on the pavement 40 stories below. The police report would call it a fall. The insurance company would call it a tragedy. Almost no one, at first, would call it what it actually was. This is the story of a man who built an empire out of other people's trust, and the people closest to him who decided that trust was worth killing for. Chicago, 2015. Marcus Halloway was 48 years old, and by every outward measure, he had already won. He'd built Halloway Dynamics from a two-person startup into a billion-dollar logistics and data firm with offices in 9 cities. Forbes had put him on a cover. His office sat on the 40th floor of the Halloway Tower, a glass spire he'd had built specifically so his desk could look down on the city he'd conquered. But empires built fast tend to have cracks nobody bothers to check. And Marcus Halloway's empire had more than most. Behind the keynote speeches and the magazine covers, Halloway Dynamics was quietly bleeding. A major government contract, the one that had made Halloway's name, was under federal review for irregularities in its bidding process. 2 board members had resigned in the span of a single month, citing differences in direction, and somewhere inside the company's servers sat a set of financial records that, if made public, would have ended more than one career. Marcus knew it. His inner circle knew it. What none of them knew, yet, was how far someone was willing to go to keep it buried. 3 people sat closest to Marcus Halloway in those final weeks. Each had a version of the truth. Each had something to lose. There was Diane Okafor, his chief financial officer, the woman who had signed off on the numbers now under federal scrutiny, numbers she would later swear she never saw in their final, falsified form. There was Peter Vance, his co-founder and oldest friend, who had been quietly frozen out of major decisions over the past year, and who had told colleagues, more than once, that Marcus was not the man I built this with anymore. And there was Renata Cole, his executive assistant of 6 years, the person who knew his calendar, his passwords, and his secrets better than his own wife did. Any one of them could tell you where Marcus Halloway was, minute by minute, on the last day of his life. What none of them could explain, not convincingly, not at first, was where they were. The morning of October 9th began like any other. Marcus arrived at 6:15, 45 minutes before the building's day shift, as he always did. Security footage shows him entering alone. It shows the elevator doors closing behind him, and it shows, at 6:52 a.m., the doors opening again, on an empty car. Between those 2 timestamps, 37 minutes passed. In those 37 minutes, a man who had never missed a single scheduled call in company history went completely silent. At 6:41 a.m., his office phone placed a call to an outside line, a call that lasted 11 seconds and was never returned. At 6:44 a.m., his laptop logged an attempt to access a file marked simply contingency. The access failed. someone, or something, had locked him out of his own document 3 minutes before he died. At 6:47, the janitor found the broken window. The official cause of death, ruled within 72 hours by the medical examiner's office, was blunt trauma consistent with a 40-story fall. The manner of death, initially, was left open, pending investigation. Reporters were told to expect a ruling of suicide by the end of the week. The Halloway family did not accept that answer, and within days, neither did the detectives assigned to the case. Here is the detail that changed everything. The glass in Marcus Halloway's office windows was rated to withstand winds of up to 120 miles per hour. It did not shatter outward from impact. It had been cut, a nearly invisible seam along one edge, later confirmed under forensic light to be the work of a glass cutting tool, not a body in motion. Someone had prepared that window in advance. Someone had known, before that morning even began, exactly how this was going to end. Detective Rosa Alvarez caught the case, and she caught it fast. 22 years on the force, the last 11 in homicide, and she would later describe the Halloway file as the cleanest crime scene I ever saw, which is exactly what told me it wasn't clean at all. The building's access logs told a story of their own. 3 keycards had been used to enter the 40th floor within the hour before Marcus Halloway died. His own, and 2 others. Diane Okafor's card logged her entering the executive suite at 6:20 a.m., 25 minutes before her scheduled arrival time. She told detectives she'd come in early to review numbers before a meeting. When asked which meeting, she couldn't say. When asked why the meeting wasn't on her calendar, she had no answer at all. Peter Vance's card never logged an entry that morning. But his car, a distinctive silver sedan, was captured on a traffic camera 2 blocks from the Halloway Tower at 6:35 a.m. He would later claim he'd been driving to a coffee shop that, records showed, didn't open until 7, and Renata Cole, the assistant who knew everything, had, 3 days earlier, requested and received a duplicate keycard for the executive floor. Company policy required 2 signatures for any duplicate card issued. Her request had only 1. 3 people, 3 broken alibis, 1 dead billionaire. The investigation into Diane Okafor moved fastest, because Diane Okafor had the clearest motive on paper. As CFO, her signature sat beneath every falsified figure the federal auditors were now circling. If the fraud came to light, her career, and quite possibly her freedom, went with it. But here's what the file doesn't show. Diane Okafor had, 6 weeks before Marcus Halloway's death, quietly hired an outside attorney, not to protect herself from the company, to protect herself from Marcus. In a sealed deposition later obtained by investigators, Diane testified that Marcus had personally altered the financial records after they left her desk, and that she had spent the final months of his life trying to build a paper trail proving exactly that. She wasn't covering for a crime, she was building a case against one. Her early arrival that morning, she said, was to retrieve a flash drive from a locked cabinet in Marcus's office, evidence she was terrified he'd discover and destroy. She left, she said, before 6:35, before the window was cut. Before anything happened, was she telling the truth? The flash drive existed. It was recovered, later, exactly where she said it would be, but a woman desperate enough to build a secret case against her boss is also a woman with every reason to want him gone before he could ruin her first. Peter Vance told a different story, and told it badly. Marcus Halloway's oldest friend had been the company's public face in its earliest years, the engineer to Marcus's salesman. But somewhere along the way, Marcus had stopped listening to him. Board seats that once went to Peter by default now went to newer names. A merger Peter had opposed went through anyway. Colleagues described him, in the months before the death, as a man watching his own legacy get quietly erased. His alibi, the traffic camera, the coffee shop that wasn't open, collapsed almost immediately under questioning. When detectives pressed him on where he actually was during those 37 minutes, Peter Vance gave 3 different answers in 3 separate interviews. It would take investigators nearly 2 weeks to learn why. Peter Vance was not near the Halloway Tower to harm Marcus. He was there to confront him, about an affair Peter had only recently discovered, one that connected 2 people no one expected. He'd parked those 2 blocks away, worked up the nerve to go in, and by the time he'd decided to actually walk through those doors, it was already too late. He'd seen the police lights before he ever reached the lobby, and he panicked. He drove home. He said nothing, and for 2 weeks, his silence looked exactly like guilt. That left Renata Cole, the assistant who knew everything, the duplicate keycard with only one signature, the woman with access to every password, every calendar entry, every secret Marcus Halloway had. What investigators found, digging into 6 years of internal emails, was a relationship far more complicated than boss and assistant. Renata Cole had, over those 6 years, quietly become the only person inside Halloway Dynamics who understood the full scope of the fraud, because Marcus had used her, again and again, to move documents, schedule meetings that never appeared on official calendars, and manage the contingency file that had locked him out at 6:44 that final morning. She hadn't been protecting Marcus's secrets. She'd been the one keeping them organized, and 3 weeks before his death, Renata Cole had been served, quietly, with a federal subpoena. Prosecutors wanted her testimony. Marcus wanted her silence. Internal messages recovered from his private server show him offering her a 6-figure retention bonus the same week, with a single condition attached, one his lawyers had drafted with unusual care, that she sign away her right to speak to investigators about anything she'd witnessed on his behalf. Renata Cole never cashed that bonus. Instead, phone records show, she made a call, at 6:38 a.m. on the morning Marcus died, to a number belonging to a federal investigator already circling the company. That call lasted 4 minutes. What was said on it would become the single most consequential piece of evidence in the entire case. Here is where the story stops being about who killed Marcus Halloway and starts being about whether anyone did at all. The glass-cutting tool recovered from the building's maintenance closet carried no fingerprints. Its purchase, traced through a hardware store 40 miles outside the city, was made in cash, by someone wearing a baseball cap the security camera never caught clearly enough to identify. The contingency file that locked Marcus out 3 minutes before his death was never recovered. It had been wiped, remotely, from a location investigators were never able to trace, routed through so many proxy servers that the trail simply stopped. And the 11-second phone call Marcus made at 6:41 a.m., the one that was never returned, it went to a prepaid phone, purchased in cash, that was never used again before or after that single, brief conversation. Someone planned this. Someone with the patience to prepare a window weeks in advance, the technical skill to erase a digital trail without a fingerprint, and the discipline to disappear completely the moment it was done. Diane Okafor was building a paper case, not planning a murder. Peter Vance was chasing a personal betrayal, not orchestrating a corporate one. Renata Cole made a call to federal investigators the same morning Marcus Halloway died. A call that either warned them a good man was in danger or confirmed that she already knew he wasn't going to survive the hour. Prosecutors ultimately brought no murder charge. Not against Diane, not against Peter, not against Renata. The evidence, a district attorney explained in a brief statement 18 months later, was substantial but not sufficient. Enough to prove that Marcus Halloway did not take his own life, not enough to prove, beyond reasonable doubt, exactly whose hand prepared that window. The federal fraud case, by contrast, moved forward without him. 2 former Halloway Dynamics executives, neither of them among the 3 people closest to Marcus that final morning, eventually pled guilty to charges connected to the falsified contract bids. The empire Marcus Halloway built did not survive its founder by more than 3 years. Diane Okafor left the corporate world entirely and now teaches forensic accounting at a Chicago university, where students say she rarely discusses her past. Peter Vance sold his remaining shares in the company and has not given a public interview since 2017. Renata Cole's federal testimony remains, to this day, partially sealed. Detective Alvarez retired in 2021, the Halloway file still, officially, unsolved. In a rare interview years later, she was asked whether she believed she knew who was responsible. She didn't give a name. She said only this, that in 22 years of homicide work, the hardest cases were never the ones with no suspects. They were the ones with too many good reasons for too many people to want the truth to stay exactly where it fell. Somewhere in a Chicago courthouse, the file on Marcus Halloway's death still sits open, not closed, not forgotten, just waiting for the one piece of evidence that never surfaced and the one person who has never told the whole truth.